Adria Smith 21 writes, I've been putting off scrapbooking my wedding photos for 4 years. I think the main reason is that I don't know how to make each individual layout stand on its own but also go together. I want to make the album cohesive without using the same papers over and over. What are some ways I could unify the layouts in the album without making them too matchy-matchy? Glittergirl, can you help Adria Smith 21 marry up her marriage pages?
Of course I can. As it turns out, I have a brand new stack of brand new wedding photos to scrapbook, but I'm going to take you through an existing wedding album first to have a look at a few of the ideas I'm going to suggest so that you can see them in a more finished point of view rather than an album that I'm just starting. So some of the things that come in handy with a wedding album are to have a little bit of a plan of action beforehand, and I don't mean that you have to have a master plan and that you have to have a deadline to get things done, but I mean to be aware of the way you work and what works best for you and the way you enjoy scrapbooking most. So if you're the kind of person that would really like to set out and make a list of the pages you want in your wedding album and then set out to have it all done by a certain time, then I think it's important to know that and set yourself up for success that way. Make a list, get all your photos in front of you, figure out which ones you're going to print and at what sizes, and make the list of the pages you want. Then you can finish it all by a deadline that you set, and you can work at a way that will really make you happy with both the process and the finished product. However, I don't think you have to block yourself into working in that way to a deadline and with an itemized list if that's not the way that you create well. I didn't work that way, and I still give myself the chance to scrapbook photos from my own wedding now. And what I do is that I just have a few things in mind of what will make things more or less go. But as we're flipping through here, you'll see that my pages are not all completely coordinated. There's not an overwhelming sense of everything being created at a certain time or in a certain style. You'll see various styles end up right next to each other, where some pages are very blocky and orderly, and then some things have a lot more soft layering done. And it's just, it captures how my style has changed over the last 4.5, 5 years. So my point of view is to make sure that it's something that I will still enjoy, but that I want all of the pages to feel like they belong together in this album. So what I did was to come up with a few colors that I would repeat throughout, and also some motifs. So you'll see butterflies and hearts repeat throughout the album, and there's also a lot of floral. I don't think any of those three things are any big surprise, and they all go along with weddings quite easily and commonly, and the only one that's an odd bit out there would be butterflies perhaps, but you know already that I use them a lot in my work, so that makes sense too. And then the colors that I'm using on the pages, you'll see a lot of pink and a lot of blue and a lot of black and white. Well, that's because our bridesmaids and our groomsmen wore blue. The bride and the groom wore pink, and we asked all our guests to wear black and white. So those are things that I wanted to keep throughout the book. But overall, there's still a lot of variety, and maybe one day I'll decide that I want to pull this back and keep just the pages in one album that look a little bit more alike. But right now, I'm quite happy with the way that the album flows and the story that's told there, and I don't mind that things are a little bit different, that the products are all from different years and things like that. But I do have a few steps to keep in mind to see what would work well for your process, and I'm going to show you how I'm doing that with the new set of wedding photos that I have. Now, I've printed just 2 today to start with the first page for this wedding, as I'm picking out my supplies and forming my own little plan for how this is going to work. The wedding colors were pink and apple green, lots of different shades of pink, but all very soft and quite vintage shades. And then the apple green was taken as inspiration. The inspiration for the apple green was the green apple logo on Beatles records, because the wedding had a Beatles theme. All the music was Beatles, all the paper and like the invitations and the menus and everything all said all you need is love, and all the guests sang all you need is love. So I really want to bring in that color scheme, but also some other elements that will always remind me of the feel of the day. So what I did was start with 2 pictures and print them. This is 2 photos put together to be about an 8x10 print. And then I created a mood board, which is a little bit like creating a mood board to plan your own wedding, but instead I created the mood board before I printed any photos by having a look and taking everything together that would sum up my memory of the day. Some of the things are there that are actually photos from other weddings. For example, I wanted to remember the detailing in the bride's dress, but I wasn't pinning any photos to this board that were from the actual day. So I took a photograph of, I added a photograph of another wedding dress that had lace on the top in the same way to give me that artistic reminder that that was a detail that I wanted to pick up somewhere in the design. I also pinned some color scheme and little color palette pieces. I pinned 2 of those actually. One because one to use with the pages throughout the day, and then another that created a softer look that I thought would be good for just portraits of the bride. The difference being that the one that I'm going to use for most of the album incorporates 2 shades of brown, a light brown and a dark brown, to anchor the color scheme with all these soft pinks and a little bit of apple green. But I don't think that the dark brown is going to be particularly flattering to the gorgeousness of bridal portraits, and I found a color scheme that kept all of those soft tones of pink, a little bit of green, and then brought in a pale neutral gray instead of the brown, and I think that's a better match. So that's kind of my process in thinking where I'm going to go with the album. I have all these different things, some that I've put on the mood board for quoting or lettering styles, but also different arrangements on the page, different elements that could create colors or textures. And as I create different pages, I think you'll see a few of these things come into play in various adventures in the future. But then once I've created that board and have an idea in my mind, my next step is to go to my supplies. And here is what I have put together at this point, and I want to talk you through not the specifics that are here, but what I'm thinking and what works well for me when I'm working on an ongoing project like this, a wedding album that I'm not going to sit down and finish all in one weekend. The first thing that comes in really handy is to have some things that you can use over and over again that will not run out. So those are things like punches and stamps. So I've taken out a heart punch because I know I can use that on wedding projects most certainly. I've picked out, and also this heart die from Lawn Fawn, which has different sizes of hearts to give me a bit more variety than just one punch. And then I've so far picked 3 stamp sets. This one from Mama Elephant because it has the All You Need Is Love stamp. There's also a couple others that would be quite sweet for a wedding. This one from My Mind's Eye because it has all sorts of just little delicate pieces that will work well. And then something that's a bit punchier for the reception photos, and that's this set from Basic Gray, which has a big stamp up here that says awesome, and then all sorts of other little speech bubbles with funny little sayings. And I think that will work well for the reception because we have photo booth photos and all sorts of fun things that go on at the party. At this point, I sometimes even pick out things like colored inks. So I wanted to go ahead and pull out a green ink to remind myself that I could just keep that ink color out and use that color throughout all of the album. Sometimes I'll change my mind as we go, but that is where I'm starting there. And then I get into the consumables. And because I use letter stickers so often on my pages, I need to make sure that I have plenty of letter stickers to go around. And that means that I'll have some thickers and some flat stickers. I've got Jelly Bean flat stickers in the pink and the apple green, and then I have thickers. Well, that color scheme, remember, I'm using the pinks and the greens, but also some light and dark brown. I love this new alphabet, which is brown with gold, and the gold touches, although they weren't a big element of the wedding, were something that I really put on the mood board because I thought it would make the perfect little finishing touch to paper work for the to remember this wedding, purely because there are some things that in real life don't translate onto paper, like the shine of a glass or something in clear crystal, for example. And there were quite a few things like that at the wedding, so they didn't need a lot of gold sparkle. But I don't think that that clear bit of shimmer is going to have the formality that I want the album to have. So I wanted to add in that little bit of gold. Now, if you're starting all with new sets of thickers, then of course you can get several titles per pack, but you won't get a whole album from one set unless you are very frugal and use a lot of short titles. So what I've done is then supplemented some partial alphabets from my existing stash, again in apple green and some in 2 different shades of pink. Then I go to the papers, and I go to my papers and I look for everything that will strike, everything that grabs my eye from the different colors that I'm looking for. So in this case, it's pink and green, and I have all these different shades of pink and green that have come to my eye as I went through my papers. There's new My Mind's Eye from Find Your Wings and Fly, but also from this new collection called Kate & Co., which is a little bit bolder in color. And then I have some Carta Bella greens. Bella Boulevard does these great solid, single-colored patterns. And I have this here somewhere in 3 colors. It's here in green too somewhere. Maybe it's further away in the pack. But they do this particular print in several different colors. So I've brought out 2 shades of pink and also a green somewhere in here. So those are the same pattern, but in a variety of colors and shades. I've got pink paisley pinks. I've got some of the new Mayberry collection from American Crafts, because that had these nice greens and pink prints. Also a green and pink floral, which is going to be useful. I may need to order some more of that if I want to spread that floral throughout the album. Some softer papers from the new crate paper, the collection that's called The Pier. I love this cream and just a little bit distressed, but it's just got this little tiny bit of pink, and I'm thinking I can add in the green and make that work. There was also this nice watercolored pink floral. This has a little bit of blue to it, but it also has all the green from the greenery in the flowers. And I'm thinking that the yellow will fade away and I can add a few bits on top of the blue so that it's not so obvious, and then it will read more as a pink and green paper. Once I get to this point where I have all these different patterns, you can see there's a lot of bold color going on here, but the patterns themselves are not too complicated. There's just a couple different patterns like a floral where it's a little bit more involved, but a lot of these are very simple patterns like polka dots, little squiggly lines, chevrons, that sort of thing, where it's just one color at a time and the patterns themselves are not too complicated. But there's a lot of color, and I don't want the photos of the day to be overwhelmed by these bold shots of color. For example, if I take this bold pink polka dot and I go back to that photo set that I'm going to use today, if I put these 2 together, you're going to say no way, because the photos are soft, they're very vintage in tone, they're very delicate, and then I've put this bright, bold polka dot behind them. So what I'm looking for then is something to bridge the gap between the lovely shots of color and the softness of the photos. And for that, I add in some neutrals. So instead of working just with something like this, the pink and white, I'll end up using a lovely neutral but not a solid color like this, which is again My Mind's Eye, but this is more of a craft toned pattern paper. It's not actually printed on craft, it is just tan on a white paper, and the other side is very vintage as well. So I have a few pattern papers like that, and then I've also pulled in some solid color in that darker brown of the color scheme that I added to the mood board. So in this case, it's an embossed cardstock that I'll just use here and there as a frame around different edges or where things just need a little bit more color. Now, I will be using pattern paper backgrounds because that's what I prefer for my pages. But if you got to this point and wondered, why is she using patterned neutrals when she could just use plain craft or white or cream cardstock, or even pale pink or pale green cardstock, then go for that sort of choice. If that's what your mind says, you'd want a solid color for the background, then go for the solid color. But if your mind says you'd love a pattern for the background, then use a pattern. There's no need to change your style just because it's a wedding. Then my last step with paper is to look for a few different papers that I'll also be able to cut up and stretch throughout the album. So I've pulled out two, and they're a little bit different, so bear with me. This one looks more the part, these little Polaroid style boxes that are watercolored that I can cut apart and use throughout the album on different pages. And this one, I wouldn't use every single ticket, but I love the idea that it says lovely day, and of course a wedding is a lovely day, and there are pink tickets in 2 shades, and there are green tickets. So what I would be looking at is cutting apart just those particular tickets and not using the other colors. I could also use a little bit of this as one of my neutrals. So that gives me a big stack of paper to work from, and I can make lots and lots of layouts from that stack of paper. So my process with a wedding album is to do something like this and have this big stack and set it aside rather than put it all back in with everything else, that all of my other craft supplies. I will go ahead and also add other embellishments into the mix. So, and at the moment, I've picked out whole packs, but what I would probably do is go through and pick out just the ones that will go with that album. For example, in this case, I really love the pink and the craft here and the craft gold and green here, but I don't want to bring in this aqua color that wasn't present at the wedding. So I would just take out the pieces that will go with the set and then put these back in with my other supplies so that I know I can use them for any page. These are from Crate Papers, the Pierre collection. I've got some stickers from older My Mind's Eye collection, Sweetest Thing and Miss Caroline. Some Ellie's Studio little die cuts in all different love themes, and there's lots of pink involved there too. I had this Heidi Swap card, and this is one where the pink is permanent, but the white is non-coated. So these are the color pop pieces where you can mist over the top, and then it won't stick to the pink, but it'll recolor the bits that are white. So I could either use it as a pink and white die cut, or if I decided I wanted to make it cream, or if I wanted to make it apple green, I can use mist or paint over the top to customize it. And same thing with the pinwheels. This is a die cut pack from the Pierre, and I'll go through and pick out the pieces that I want to keep in this kit, and then I'll put the rest in with my other supplies. But I loved that those colors and that lovely little cream with a bit of pink is in here, but also some gold sequins, things like the number 2 in green. That's perfect for a wedding. And this is another one. This is a sticker sheet. So in this case, I'd actually be cutting it apart and keeping just those pieces in here. But this repeats that floral that's on the pattern paper. This is American Crafts Mayberry. So I will put together a kit like that. And by having lots of supplies there ready in that box, I tend to put it in a little box so that I can work from it any time. And also knowing that I have things like the stamps and punches and dies that will be able to spread throughout the book, then I find I get enough continuity by having something that's set there, and then I can add to this whenever I want to. Because I've not gone out and thought that everything has to be brand new and all from one collection, it means that as other things come out, say this summer they release a beautiful, beautiful line that's all pink and green florals, and I think, oh, that's the perfect collection, but it didn't exist when I started this album. Because everything here is already a mix, I can mix it in, and that will make it absolutely fine to pick up additional new papers and not have that challenge. So today I'm going to go ahead and take you through one page that I'm going to make from the supplies I've picked out here, and I think you'll see a little more of them as I go through a few other coming up adventures. Now, as you work through the first few layouts of this project, you'll find that you'll stop and realize there's something that you wish you had in the kit of supplies, and this is a great way to just be aware of what you're using to create and what you would naturally go to, and then you'll end up adding a few more things. You'll also probably end up prepping a few things to take a little bit of the harder work or the longer time-consuming parts of the process out. So for example, I showed you earlier that I'd added the set of heart dies by Lawn Fawn to the mix, as well as my normal heart punch, so that I would have a variety of different heart shapes that I could use throughout the project. So I went ahead and just grabbed a few papers that I could run through my die cutter, and at that point I realized, hey, I haven't chosen anything that's a 6x6, which would make it a lot easier to have smaller patterns and smaller pieces to go through the die cutter. So I went and added three paper pads to my box of supplies that I'll use for this wedding, 2 different Dear Lizzie collections, the Neapolitan and Fifth and Frolic, and then the Glitz Hello Friend, which has all those lovely shades of pastel pink and lots of little hearts and clouds and sweet little details like that. And then cut a variety of those papers into the heart shapes so that I have those just sitting there, and when I won't have to use them all on this layout, I'll be putting those on pages throughout the project. Then I also like to start really simply so that I'm not worrying too much. So I had that print with the 2 large photos. That's 2 photos put together to make an 8x10. And I chose a background paper, that's from American Crafts Mayberry, and then an accenting paper in the other color of the wedding. So I have the pink and the green already represented. But remember that color board I'm using also includes a darker and a lighter brown to anchor the 2 brighter colors. So I decided I would go ahead and start with the dark brown cardstock on the 12x12 background, and I've just cut the pink to ever so slightly smaller. And I know that having flipped this over, a bunch of you may freak out. I know, it's okay. It's a cut apart sheet and I'm using the B-side, the entire B-side. I'm not using any of these cards. It's okay. There's more paper in the world, and I really liked this particular paper, so I'm not going to panic that it's on the back of a cut apart sheet and I'm using it perhaps in a different way than what might be expected. I'm okay with that. It's just paper. I'm going to get over it. And then I'll have the photo to adhere to the mat. Now I order most of my prints online, but sometimes I either want a special size or I want to have something really quickly, or in this case, when I have the first few photos from a project, I like to print them at home so that I can proof everything before I upload it all to make sure I'm happy with the colors and the detail and there's nothing that's looking different on my screen. So in this case, I've printed these 2 at home on normal photo paper. I do get a much higher quality print if it goes to a normal lab, but my photo printer at home is a decent photo printer, so I'm happy to use those prints in my album too, but I do prefer the finish of something that's been through proper film processing, as it were. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and stick that and not worry too much about wondering if it should go 1/2 inch to either side. I'm just going to go ahead and commit to that and then start working on a bit of embellishment and the titling to get this started. I'm not 100% that this would be the title page in the album, but I do think it would be one of the signature pages, which I tend to think of as a few different layouts that are done more to be very pretty and a statement rather than being one where I'm going to write lots of detail on the page. Now, I started with the die cut, the ephemera pack from Crate Paper's Pier Collection and brought out a few bits that I want to use on this page. I wanted to start bringing in the gold straight away. And I wanted to include this scalloped piece, but in the pack I didn't realize that these pieces are all sewn together. So all those layers are already done for you, and I really had it was this large piece up here that caught my eye, and I don't really want to use these 2 colors. The more I looked at it, the more I like bringing in this one because that's the medium brown from my color scheme, and it has that little bit of gold. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this apart. I'm just going to fold this back and then cut the 2 layers that I don't want to use so that I can use them somewhere else where they will match the color scheme, but it's not going to be in this album. So I will put them back in. Now, it is great that they're layered like that because if layering is a challenge to you, this pack of die cuts will take all of the complication out of it. It'll make the layers look great and you won't have to do anything except stick them on. But you can cut them back and take them apart again, of course. So I basically have a few different options here. This is a piece that looks like it should go at the top. Of course, I could run it down the side of something. You could certainly turn it around, but I like the idea of it running in this direction, especially because the reason this chevron print, well, it's a twist on a chevron, caught my eye is because it's kind of like an abstract heart if it's pointing in that direction. If I point it in any other direction, you're just going to see an arrow. You're not going to see the heart shape. So I want it to go this direction. I don't want it to be over on top of this photo because this photo, there's much less headspace in the picture, the space above your subject. And in this case, that is literally their heads. But this is what we refer to as the headspace in a picture, the part of the frame that's open in the background at the top. Now see, this one has a lot more because the subject is the bouquet, and I have all this space up here that's nice and blurry, and I'm not going to crowd the photos or crowd the subject by having something up here, but I would if this was here. I hope that makes sense. I also want to bring in my stamps straight away, and I want to use this All You Need Is Love stamp. So I started by just stamping it with a few different ink pads on some paper that would match the layout, and that way I could choose an ink pad that I liked the look of, and I've ended up using my Jenny Boland brown ink. And then I've just cut to about the width of the stamp and added this banner at the side. And I only cut one at the moment because I was going to decide if I wanted it to be off the page or if I wanted it to be quite central. Where I have those two different color boards that just have the difference of the brown and the gray as the neutrals, I'm going to go ahead and use that cue with my ink as well. And on all the pages where it's the whole wedding and I'm using the brown accents, I'll be using brown ink. But on the pages where I'm doing just bridal portraits and I want things to be softer, I'm using gray as a neutral, so I'll use gray ink around the edges. That's my plan anyway. And so now I want, having started something up here, I want to bring something down to this side, but I also am aware that I have this space here in the middle, and I'm toying with the idea of where I have space in the bottom here, and I know that this is going to disrupt this lovely picture a little bit, but because I'm thinking of the whole album and not this as just one particular page in the album, I know that the beauty of her dress is going to be apparent on very many pages. There are plenty of photos where you see the full dress, including the train and everything. So that means that I'm not too worried if I cover up a bit of it now. So I may bring this into the middle of the photo here. Originally I kind of liked the idea of having it central, but I think that that's a little too busy when it gets into this space where it's covering both the white and the gray. It's a much cleaner edge if I bring it back so that it's only layering over the white there. Sometimes if I'm not sure where something is going to go, I actually take that as a cue if I can't decide the exact right point, because here I'm thinking I like the placement. If I don't look at the top of the page, I like it here, but where I have this element here, I'm not quite convinced on this. I think now I've put too much on top of that photo, and I'm not particularly happy with the flow because it's not on a nice angle. It's a little bit too straight up and down. So sometimes if something like that is not giving me an answer straight away on where it should go, I take that as a cue to take it off for the moment and come back to it later. It might mean that once I've added a few other elements to the page, a perfect place will present itself. So instead of worrying too much about that stamped piece, I'm going to pick up another die cut, and this is from that same pack. And this particular die cut is in the crepe paper pack 3 times in 3 different colors. I think it's pink, green, and blue. So I've kept the pink and the green one to use in this album and then put the blue aside for something else. And this one is going to overlap that photo, but I'm much happier with the angle between these two embellishments now. And this is separated from the actual couple in the picture. I'm not overlapping his tux or anything like that. That gives me a little bit more freedom there, and it might mean that I can bring this back in and overlap it somewhere over here. But I'm not going to push it too far, because sometimes if you've been looking at a piece on your page for too long, it just needs to set aside so your mind can clear a little bit. And I do know that one thing I wanted to add on top of this piece was the initials of the the husband and wife. So I'm going to go ahead and start in with my letter stickers so that I can add those in and then see what other embellishment is going to frame it. In adding the lettering, I've just placed it down lightly on the page without pressing the adhesive down at all, so that I could have a look at how it would fit here and all of the different looks, even though there's not really that much on the page right now. And I wondered if I would want another layer behind this. My first thought had been to place a heart shape behind the lettering with the and symbol over the top, but I don't think that the sizes are a good match, and I think it's a little bit hard to tell what's going on there. So I decided instead to add a little bit of layering with a stamp behind the letters. Now I'm using a floral stamp from this My Mind's Eye set from the new Find Your Wings and Fly collection, and some pink ink. And I've stamped this on scrap paper a few times so that I know what the color of the ink looks like and how it's going to stamp before I add it onto my die cut, since I just have the one die cut. And I just want to make sure I get the right flower at the top for what I wanted, and I'm going to pop it right there in the middle of the box. And if it doesn't stamp perfectly, that's okay, because I'm looking to add layers over the top, but I wanted something delicate and pink in the background behind the letters, and a stamp should do that. So now I can come back in with my lettering, and I'll have this lovely little bit of pink to frame the letters behind, and that will make it a bit dressier. Now, if you are going to pick out a few stamp sets for a longer term project like a wedding album or anything else that's themed, if you're watching this while this video is brand new, this is the best time to go ahead and choose your stamp sets. There's a huge sale on, and every stamp, including the brand new ones that have just arrived in the store, is at least 25% off right now. So that includes these brand new sets. So I'll put a few of my different favorite stamp sets for weddings in the supply list in case there's anything there that catches your eye while it's a bargain for the next few days. Because this die cut is large, it's quite tempting to add some of the other large elements that I've put out on the table to this space, because I could add in this banner, I could add in this giant number 2 die cut, and the things will all fit and be nicely framed in this box. But I'm looking at things that are very delicate and not quite as bold as what I tend to use on my pages, so I want to go with something smaller. So instead of filling all of that space with layers, I'd quite like to use this smaller gold die cut and use a date stamp to put in their wedding date. But instead of using the full longer line, I'm just using the date side, and you might have a stamp that's just dates. And then if there's too much room and I stamp the date a little bit too low, I can bring in just the phrase off either this set or a phrase only stamper, so that I can add the 2 lines one above each other instead of one long line that wouldn't fit on this tiny little die cut. All those little heart die cuts can now come in really useful to create something that connects the embellishment up here at the top with this embellishment that I've started here at the bottom. And basically I want to sprinkle them on a little bit like confetti, but because they're hearts, I want to make sure they're pointed the right direction and everything. It's a little bit different than just dropping the confetti onto the page. But I also wanted to bring in something that will be a little bit more organic, as if I've just dropped it on the page. And for that, I'm going to use the gold sequins in this ephemera pack. So I'm just going to bring out a few so that I have some to go at the top and some to go at the bottom of the page. And then I really can just drop them on the page and see where they fall, and then go back and glue them down. Then sequins can be adhered in lots of different ways. You can use a little bit of liquid glue, because there is the stitch spot in the center. You can actually hold them in place with some thread if you like this sewn idea, or you can use any sort of glue that will adhere to the back. And what I tend to do is use my normal dot adhesive, but I just, instead of trying to roll it onto something, I hold the roller in my hand and just roll it across the dots here. Now that I've started to have some of those smaller details in place, I can see where I have more empty space and where I'm tempted to add a little bit more detail to dress things up. And I've brought in that same bit that I've stamped, but I've cut it down to a smaller rectangle. And I'm thinking that this space here would be a great place to put that stamp design, but I'll be honest that when I place this here, I'd much rather have the same stamp design right on top of the pink stripes. But because everything else is in place, that is a little bit of a risk. If I stamp it imperfectly, I'm going to need to put something over the top. So this is my process for such a thing, and that's that if I like this enough that I would be okay for it to be another piece of paper on top, then I'll go ahead and give it a try because I know I have nothing to lose. I'll be okay if I put it over the top as another layer. If I hated this and I didn't like the idea of having a rectangle of paper here at all, then I would not risk it unless I knew that I was an amazing stamper who never gets it wrong. That's not me. Sometimes I still get it wrong. But I think I can practice this one a few times on a scrap bit of paper to make sure that I get it right and then be able to make it work for the page. And one thing to keep in mind is to look at where your block is going to run into other things on the page so that you place your stamp in the right spot on the block so that you won't get everything all inked up and then realize that you're putting things over layers that aren't going to let you stamp evenly on the background. And of course, when it does work and it does stamp just how you imagined it, you give yourself a big cheer and then move on. I did get brave enough to also add another stamp down here at the bottom, and that's an older Pebbles stamp set that you might have in your stash. And then I wanted to add something that would bring this stamping in with the other paper layers that I've included. So I had a look through my stamps looking for something that would be a small heart shape. And I love stamps like this that have both a solid and an outline shape, because then you can use two colors and different kind of a different look that basically lets you continue the paper layering with the way that you stamp. So I'm going to start with the solid heart shape. This set's by Lawn Fawn, by the way. And then I come back to the outline and I stamp the solid shape in the color of the layout. So in this case, that's going to be pink ink. And then when I go back to the outline stamp, I'll use the detail coloring, which is the brown. So I want to bring this heart shape into all the kind of confetti heart look, and I like to stamp them twice before I re-ink so that I get one that's bold color and one that's a bit more pale. And in fact, with a pink it's going to be very pale, but remember I'm going to put an outline on top of that as well. And then I'll bring one into this layer here and repeat it down at the bottom of the page. So then I have the outline stamp, and I go back and follow that same line and the same thing of inking or stamping twice for each inking. So I go to the first one and just line it up and stamp. And I love that it doesn't have to be perfect because it actually looks quite nice with a little gap around the edges. And then the second stamp on the paler heart, and now you can see that that's a lot more obvious with the outline than it was when it was just the solid shape. And at this point, I want to add just a few finishing touches. I want to add a little bit of writing, even though I don't want it to be a journaling heavy page. So I'll go ahead and do that now, and then come back and have one last look at anything else I might want to add to this page. And after having a look at the mood board one more time to see if there was anything that kind of struck my eye that could translate into an embellishment, and then looking back at the layout, I decided I would only add one more little detail after I added the tiny bit of writing, and that was this strip of brown baker's twine. And then I've pulled that baker's twine to put in with this box of supplies that I'll use throughout this project. And I think just adding a little bit of that brown twine here and there will help that brown in the color scheme just fit together and anchor everything a little bit more and bring all the colors together. So your challenge this week, you've got 2 options, because I know not everybody has wedding photos to scrapbook or is not working, not everybody is necessarily working on a wedding album. So if you are working on a wedding album or a wedding page, your challenge is to share a wedding page with us in the gallery. So create a wedding layout and upload it, and then in the box below your photo, tell us what tips you're using or what supplies you've gathered and what's your process as you're working on wedding pages as opposed to your ordinary everyday pages. If you're not scrapbooking a wedding and you don't have anything like that to tackle at the moment, then tell us about how you collect supplies for any particular project. So it might be that you're making an album about one of your children's hobbies, or something that you really enjoy doing and you want to put it all together in an album. For example, I have an album that's just all of my cupcake recipes, rather than spreading the cupcake recipes throughout all my books and then having to remember where it is if I actually wanted to go get the recipe and give it to somebody. I have them all in one book. So that works in the same sort of principle, where I've taken a few sets of supplies and then put them aside so they're earmarked for that project. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on creating a longer project like that, because we all have different methods. So make sure you leave us a little note under your layout, and if you want to, go ahead and include a photo of all your supplies gathered to help illustrate your point. I hope you enjoy this little adventure, and don't forget to check out the stamp sale. I will see you soon. Thanks for watching.
Join us next week for the continuing adventures of Glitter Girl and the ongoing mystery of the scrapbooker behind the mask at twopsinabucket.com.